and welcome back to another episode of the Widow podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I am really honoured and super thrilled to be talking to a really lovely lady, and I know you're going to get an awful lot from this conversation because today I am joined by Diane Evans-Wood. Now, Diane herself is a podcaster, a blogger, a mum, a wife, and a palliative care nurse. Diane is also living with metastatic ovarian cancer. And she is here to share her story and talk about her own losses, anticipatory grief, and what she desires for her son and her husband after she has gone. So, Diane, there's a lot there, isn't there, to talk about, but thank you so much. I have to say, you got in touch with me, didn't you, on Instagram, because you've been listening to the podcasts and you have been following me. And we kind of got chatting a bit. And I did think at the time, because I knew you were living with, the metastatic ovarian cancer. And I wanted to kind of reach out to you and ask you to come on. But I was like, I don't want to put her in a position that she doesn't. But then amazingly, you kind of reached out to me and said, I'd really like to come and be a guest and share my story from, I guess, the other side of the table, isn't it? That you said, I know that at some point my husband is going to become a widower. And, you wanted to share your side of the story, I suppose, and how you feel in this process and what you want for them moving on. So I was absolutely amazed. And I think you were so brave and so courageous to come on and do this. And I know you have your own podcast, which is brilliant, and that's called Living with Ovarian Cancer podcast, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it's very different being the guest.
That's it, and that's why I thought, oh wow, you're amazing. You really are amazing. So thank you for joining us and coming and sharing your time and your thoughts and your experiences with us. I know this is going to be, really helpful, I think, to a lot of people that have lost loved ones through an illness. So welcome.
I'm just really grateful that I've got this opportunity to be able to talk about our experiences, if you like. I also feel very strongly that as a palliative care clinical nurse specialist, it's really important that I actually walk the talk as well, because over all those years of nursing, and especially with specialising in palliative care, having those very, very poignant and very important conversations was an everyday part of my life. And I just feel so hypocritical if I didn't do that myself. And unfortunately, I find myself in that situation now where I'm in the palliative phase of my disease. And I know lots of people say, oh, but you don't look ill, and you look so well. But, looking on the screen, what you see is only a little part of my life, our lives. And I do look well because makeup and a ring light with a soft focus on me makes me look very well.
Do you know what? And I think that's such a good point, isn't it? I think we're all very quick to look at someone and say, you look really well, and there might underneath be also, physical, mental anguishes going on that we know nothing about. And you can't judge someone's reality on their appearance. You just can't. We've no idea. And, we all want to look well, don't we? Because it makes us feel better, I think, as well, when we make that bit of effort. But like you say, to kind of judge our reality on how we show up in our day-to-day life isn't always a true reflection of that.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So just, to give the listeners a little bit of background, Diane, just, how, you've got to this place in your life, how long you've been living with the diagnosis that you've currently got, and what led you to, I guess, want to share your story to support others through your own podcast and your own blogs.
Okay. Well, we'd need to go right back to 2013, actually, which was one hell of a year. I was top of my game in my career, palliative care, CNS, loving my work, working full time. My son at home, he was at college, and I was living in the place Glastonbury, which was really my spiritual town. That's where I wanted to live. I'd always wanted to live there. And then I met Simon. I can't believe our luck that we met through mutual friends, and yeah, we sort of hit it off so quickly. We had an absolute blast of a year in 2013. Music festivals, concerts, visiting all sorts of places, exploring places that we wanted to be. And yeah, it was a wonderful, wonderful year. And you can imagine, we were so much in love that first year, the first throes of passion. It was amazing. And then that was in the March. Now in the December of that same year, I suddenly woke up with a sudden pain, and that pain was lower abdominals, bladder area, but it was radiating into my back, and it was so painful. It kept me awake all day long. So I went to see my GP the next day, knowing that something wasn't quite right. And she said, "Oh, it's probably just the menopause. You're probably perimenopausal." Now, I think everybody should know the signs and symptoms of menopause, but I know that that's not one of them. So she could tell I wasn't very happy. So she said, "Well, I'll do some tests." So I had a blood test done, which came back, and the CA125 was raised. Now, that's a protein that's present often with ovarian cancer. So obviously my alarm bells were going. And because that was raised, she ordered an ultrasound scan, which took place in the January, and that showed an ovarian cyst. So I was referred then to a gynecologist. It was a fast track system because of the CA125 being raised. And he said, "Well, I don't think there's anything to worry about. It's a very small cyst." And he did what they call a score, which is, I'm trying to remember what it was called now. But it's a score that tells you whether there's a risk of ovarian cancer or malignancy. It's malignancy index score. So the risk of malignancy index score, I should say. So an RMI, that's come to me now, is it chemo brain? So that came back, and the risk of ovarian cancer was very, very low. So, you wrote the score down in my medical records and circled it a couple of times, did a couple of bull stops as if to labour that point. No, nothing to worry about. So he could see I was worried. So he thought, "Well, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to just remove it?" So I wanted it removing. So in the February of it was 2014, it would have been by then, I went and had a laparoscopy. So an exploratory laparoscopy, but also to remove the cyst. And I was kept in overnight, and when it was a day case, it was meant to be a very simple operation. So I kind of knew something wasn't quite right. And he told me it was cancer. So that was quite a surreal moment, actually. The way that you're told, the curtains are pulled around you, and everybody else in the ward can hear what's said. And then the curtains go back and everybody's kind of not looking at you. Yeah, so it was a very surreal moment, that was. I was surprised, yet not surprised. So I'd been feeling very tired. And in hindsight, on reflection, I'd been feeling very bloated, getting bouts of constipation, and then, of course, with this sudden pain. So the memory of that day, it always sticks in my mind, actually. It was a beautiful day. My sister and my mum came to pick me up from the hospital. My sister was driving, and it's quite bizarre. And I looked at her and I said, isn't it a lovely day to be told you've got cancer, sunshine, blue sky? And we just couldn't stop laughing. Humour plays a big part in all of this coping, I think. And my poor mum in the back of the car crying her eyes out, saying, well, what are you laughing about? She found it very, very difficult. So there's me and my sister, laughing, giggling all the way home. But I think that was just masking the shock, to be honest. So I was referred to a gynae-oncology surgeon. So in April 2014, I had quite major surgery. They did a hysterectomy, took the rest of what was left of my one ovary and the other ovary away. Took away the omentum, which is like an apron of fat that covers the whole of the abdominal cavity to protect it. And he was telling me that I've got stage 3 ovarian cancer and that I'd need chemotherapy afterwards. So that actually was quite difficult, because I'd got very, very long dreadlocks at the time. It took me ages to get them, and it was part of my image. And I just adored them, going to the festivals. I felt like I really fitted in, and so I was going to lose those. And then after the surgery, I had quite a bad time, Karen. I had a hemorrhage, and it was not really expected, because I was doing really well. Started to bleed vaginally, and then the first bleed, I went to hospital. They sent me home. I stopped bleeding, but the second one was pretty significant, and I had to have counselling because of that, because I had PTSD because of the shock and the horror of what happened. But it was like the life force was just draining from me. And I remember being in the ambulance and the blue light going, and then I don't remember anything very much after that. I woke up in resus with several doctors trying to get a cannula in, and then I was frightened. I was quite peaceful in the ambulance, but then I was frightened because this is very real. I had to try and get some contact with my mum. The nurses were brilliant in resus, because all the blood on the floor at home in the bathroom was still going to be there, because that morning I'd left, it was just all there. The ambulance men had carted me away, and all the blood was still there, and my son would have got home from college to find that. So my poor mum went over and cleaned all that up. So she, again, another sort of horrific situation for her to be in. I just remembered something, actually, that Luna's just caught my eye, my cat on the bed. When I was in the bathroom, sat on the toilet waiting for the ambulance to come, with all this blood draining from me and blood all over the bathroom floor, and Luna kept coming in and padding through, and the ambulance men had to keep on picking her up, and she's hissing like a good one, so. But yeah, she was obviously picking up on the vibes that things weren't great.
They're so intuitive, aren't they?
They are, aren't they? Animals, they're wonderful. Then I jump ahead, then the following month, it would have been in May, I'm thinking I'm going to have chemotherapy, and I've been told I've got high-grade serous ovarian cancer. And then everything changed. All of a sudden, the pathology had come back, and I'd got a rare disease called borderline ovarian tumours. Now, it's difficult to describe what that is, but it's not exactly cancer, but it's not cancer either. So the cells are slower growing, and they appear to be abnormal like cancer, but not full-blown malignancy. And that was really weird, because suddenly I've gone from having full-blown cancer to something that's less serious. Great that I hadn't, but I got all that trauma. I'd been through all that horrific stuff. And because it wasn't cancer, I found that people, they thought, well, it's not serious. You should be really glad it's not cancer. And people fell by the wayside. I didn't get the same support as if it was cancer. So I was left very much on my own, really. I was still going back to the oncologist every 3 months. And in September of that year, I had the surgery in the April, and then in the September I went back to work. But even that was very different. I went back on a phased return, work were brilliant, and they accommodated what I needed. And I soon got back to visiting patients again. But I went back and I was changed. Changed because I'd been through so much. Everybody else seemed the same, but I had changed so much after what I'd been through, like I say. And it changed me as a nurse as well. It made me view patients and what they'd been through very differently. I went back into professional mode, and I was so glad to be back to some kind of normality, although it was a new normal for me, because obviously I'd been through hysterectomy. I was in surgical menopause. So to go from not menopause to full-blown menopause, wow, that is something else. At that point, I had some HRT as well to help me, because the drenching sweats that I had were just, debilitating and so embarrassing, sat there in front of GPs, male GPs in meetings. And then I suddenly get these hot flushes and I was, sat in a pool of sweat. So, yeah, it was really hard what that was. But yeah, the patients, again, kept me going. I learned so much from them. I saw them in a different light. I knew what it was like to be told you've got cancer, to be waiting for investigations and results. That waiting game is a nightmare. But in July of 2015, the following year, I started to have symptoms again. And I told my gynae oncologist when I went for a routine appointment, he said, I don't think there's anything to worry about, but we'll do a CT scan anyway, just for reassurance. He said he didn't think it would be cancer. But they found on there what looked like a lymph node, but again, reassured that it wasn't cancer. So in the November, they removed the lymph node. And the surgeon rang my husband after the surgery that evening and said that lymph node was actually cancer. My borderline ovarian tumours had developed into full-blown low-grade serous ovarian cancer. Now, bear in mind that I had thought that borderline disease wouldn't have ever progressed, because that's what I was told. It's rare and not much was known about it, as with low-grade. So yeah, told I'd got cancer. I remember getting home from that surgery. My mum she came and stayed with me to help look after me, because I was quite poorly getting over that surgery, mentally and physically. But telling my son that I'd got cancer the second time, that was worse. To hear my son, I can't remember how old he would have been, 18, sobbing in his bedroom, my heartbroken mum, wanting this to be her and not me, all that bargaining that you go through, take me, don't take her. And my dad on the phone trying to control his voice. I could tell that he was trying not to cry. Very emotional time. And I remember feeling that sense of that guilt, because as cancer patients, a person with the cancer, we cause so much pain. But then from the December to the May, December 2015 to May 2016, I had 6 cycles of chemotherapy, and I lost my beautiful dreadlocks, cut them all off, but the hair started to come out on Boxing Day, and by New Year's Eve it was quite painful. The hair follicles hurt. It's quite strange. And Simon, he shaved my head for me, and at the same time he shaved his own.
Oh, bless him.
It was a very, very tender moment, to be honest. But I was in and out of hospital with chemotherapy, with low white blood cells, and just the general side effects. It really floored me. But I couldn't cope at home on my own, because my son was living his life. He's got his own issues, his mental health issues, and I don't think he was coping great with what was happening with me. My family lived in Dorset. Me being in Somerset, they were in Dorset, and some of my family up north, which my sister in Dorset couldn't just drop everything to keep coming because she was working with children in care. So she just couldn't drop everything to come and look after me. So I temporarily moved to the New Forest, which is where I am now, and to the house that Simon and I had purchased, because I actually had a critical illness plan, which I cashed in, and we bought this house together then. And so luckily, you know, we'd got this place, but I didn't anticipate that I'd be moving so quickly. So yeah, I left Sam behind, and looking after the cat and and looking after the house. But it was the house in Glastonbury was rented. And still paying the rent on it, obviously, because it was his home, intending to go back and then go back to work, and all the rest of it. But I never really recovered. I never went, it took me a long time to recover. And I'd been off probably a year, and work needed me to go back to my job. You know, with a role like that, it's highly specialized professional work. They needed me to go back. So my sick pay ran out, so I had decisions to make. I wasn't ready to go back to work. So what I did was I took early ill health retirement, but the money didn't come through quickly enough. So obviously my sick pay finished, but my pension took a few months to come through. So I ended up having to give up the home that we were in. And my son then, he rented a small flat in Glastonbury. So I wasn't ready for that. The feeling of leaving him behind. Sam and I had been, we've always been very close, because being a single parent for many years, it was just me and Sam. And so to leave him behind in Glastonbury breaks my heart even now. And there's never a day that goes by when I just wish that I could be there, but I'm not. I'm here. So I retired, and I did go back to work, but in a consultancy role for a local hospice. So I was seeing patients in outpatients, which was really lovely. To be getting back to. It was just one day a week. And then November 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, totally unrelated to ovarian cancer. So I'm BRCA negative, which is a genetic, what do you call it? Yeah, malformation. That's the only word I can think. Chemo brain again. Yeah, so a mutation, that's the word. It always comes to me in the end, Karen. It might be hours later, but yeah, I was BRCA negative. So I genetically, that wasn't the reason why I had breast cancer. So yeah, ended up having to go through all of the treatment regarding that. I went through wide local incision, so in effect a lumpectomy. They just took the lump out. I got big boobs anyway, so I didn't really notice very much that it was gone. And then it was followed by several weeks of radiotherapy, which pretty much sailed through. After going through ovarian cancer, I think that experience with the breast cancer didn't faze me so much. But sadly, after all that, I felt like it was time to give up nursing, because having two cancers really wasn't appropriate to be going back to work with such poorly patients. So I set about continuing a role in a voluntary capacity, I suppose, by doing other things like the podcast and blogging, and supporting other women with ovarian cancer in Facebook support groups. And I set up, during lockdown, the beauty of discovering Zoom was that I set up a Southampton ovarian cancer support group, because although Southampton's a city, we didn't have an ovarian cancer support group. So I set that up, which is still running really well. But since those days of having, I've had further chemotherapy, jumping through the hoops to access other treatments. You see, in the UK, we've got the NICE guidance, and that sort of depicts on what sort of treatments that we have. And I had to have more chemotherapy to be able to access further treatment. And so I had more chemo, but I didn't cope very well with that. And in any case, my cancer doesn't respond very well to chemo. And it's very hard to put something so toxic into your body when you know it's going to be doing very little. And I've had several recurrences over the years, and I've pretty much exhausted what's available to me. And my disease now is widespread throughout my abdomen. It's spread into my chest. So I've got metastatic ovarian cancer, like you've introduced me as having. And so at the moment, I'm not taking any treatment, but the cancer markers are going up and up and up. But symptomatically, I'm not too bad. So I'm holding off going back on to trametinib, which is a targeted therapy. I'm holding off on going back to that because once I've exhausted that option, I've got nothing else left. So I'm holding off until I've got more symptoms. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm in the palliative phase, which we're just, in my professional experience, people get very, very confused about all these words, don't they? You know, that terminology, but palliative care and hospice care in the UK are the same thing in effect, specialist palliative care. And it's for people that have got progressive life-limiting illnesses like cancer or multiple sclerosis or motor neuron disease, that sort of thing. But the disease might be able to be treated but not cured. So that's what palliative care is. And then people often think that hospice care is end-of-life care, but that's actually the last few days or last weeks of somebody's life, whereas with the palliative phase, you can live for a very long time these days in palliative care because the treatments are so good. So from my story, you can probably pick up there are so many lost situations, aren't there, for me and my loved ones. And yeah, I find myself now having time to plan ahead and reflect on everything that I've gone through. So yeah, that's kind of my story up till now.
I think, Diane, thank you for sharing that. And I think that your ability to share your story so well, so calmly, you articulate it in such a brave way. And I know when we spoke last time, your training, your years of doing the job that you do, there's almost that element that you can talk about it in a way that you're almost talking about somebody else.
Yes, exactly.
And that's a coping mechanism for you. And and I think that's brilliant, isn't it? Because it then allows you to do this and to do your podcast and write your blogs and create the support groups, because it must be so difficult to tell that story and relate it as your own.
It is. Sometimes I think it's a good thing. I almost, my oncologist always smiles because I talk as if I'm talking to her about another patient, but I'm talking about me. And occasionally it really hits me, and I take a nosedive, but it is definitely, like you say, a coping strategy. And I'm very lucky that I've had so much experience with palliative care, because it has meant that it has not been the scary experience that so many other patients might feel that it is. Everything is familiar to me, going into the hospital, all the investigations, all the medical jargon. It's all familiar to me. It's everyday stuff to me. And so it naturally, I just fell into that pattern of, oh, well, I'm talking about me, but I am that patient now. Whether that continues, I don't know.
Well, I'm sure you have your moments where, like you say, that you're able to almost remove yourself from it and talk about it in a professional kind of manner almost. But then in the moments where it does get you, and the reality of your situation and it being you, and those feelings, those emotions come to the surface, how do you deal with those, Diane? What do you do for you? I mean, are you able to talk to your family and friends about how you truly feel, or is that how you define the support groups? Because I think you touched on at the beginning of your story that the guilt you feel for causing the pain. So I'm assuming, and you shouldn't assume, that it's quite difficult for you to truly share what's going on for you with those you love, because it must be so hard for them to hear it.
Yeah, I'm too busy supporting every other person. I've always been like it, ever the nurse, even from a child. I've always been that person. I do talk to my family, but it is very difficult for them, I think, because obviously all of this is something that I'm used to talking about, but for them it's not. This is all very new. And we're all going through different feelings as well, our own grief, because what we're going through, and we've spoken about this, is anticipatory grief. And anticipatory grief as in anticipating the death of somebody. And of course, I'm still alive and I've still got those, I'm going through that grief as well in a different way. So simultaneously, we're going through grief. And I'm used to talking about all of this, and in my head I have the headings that sort of tell me what I need to say about anticipatory grief, and in part, and all of these headings, if you look at phases of grief, they're almost the same. So like with disbelief, that it's not happening, that denial kind of thing. It felt like that to begin with, but it's not so much now. Obviously I've had this since 2014, so I've had time to come to terms with it all. But with the knowledge from my career, I've had a bit of a head start, really, to be able to, I know the drill, so I've got over that phase. Now, I know that I probably will revisit that, because we know that grief's not linear. It's cyclical. You go round in circles, really, don't we, revisiting different phases of grief. But the guilt is a biggie. It consumes me at times, particularly because Simon and I had so little time without cancer, and that really saddens me. We had so many plans, dreams, and sometimes I wonder whether Simon resents me. Am I holding him back? Am I stopping from him having a fulfilling life? And I just feel so guilty at times that my health has changed and our lives so drastically. And even from everyday stuff, like me not having the energy to do things around the house, to intimacy because of all the surgery and everything that I've had, or the treatment, even that's not the same anymore. But it's changed the dynamic of our relationship from how it used to be, because I worked full time. I was a strong woman, still am, but in a different way. But I had a responsible job. I felt like I had a purpose in life. I was vibrant and I was full of optimism. And now I feel like I'm just a shadow of myself. And that's my feeling. I'm not saying that that's real. That's how I feel. And Simon would probably say something very different. And I'm not the only one to say this, what I'm going to say, but there are times when I've thought, and I've said this to Simon, that perhaps he should find somebody else. And I've spoken to plenty of other women who have said the same to their husband, because it's such a drastic change. because it's really hard to try and carry on as normal when cancer's there lurking on the sidelines, and particularly when you're living with cancer for such a long time. You know, he's living with it as well. So obviously he always says, no, of course I'm never going to go meet anybody else. And he married me knowing that I'd got cancer. We had a beautiful woodland wedding. So yeah. And I look,
go on.
I was going to say, I think I've said this to you when we spoke before, but it's really strange. I look around and I wonder if certain women in our lives, I look and think, will they be the one that Simon chooses? You know, because it'd be quite, in my opinion, it'll be quite a catch for someone when I'm gone. So I talk quite openly, and I'll say, oh, I wonder if she'll be the one. But yeah, no.
Would you quite like, because I do know of widows and widowers that have obviously, you know, lost their person and then, you know, formed a relationship through that loss with a close friend of their late husband or wife, and there's guilt in that for them afterwards, or what. But you know, for you, when you obviously you're looking around at this and having these thoughts, does that bring you some comfort almost? Would that be something that you would quite like to see if you get to see what happens after you've gone, because you know them and you feel like there's that connection?
Yeah. There are moments that I'm thinking, I hate the thought of him being with somebody else. But actually it does bring me some comfort. Life's for living, and Simon gets very upset when we talk about it. He can't imagine being with anybody else because it's not been like being divorced or separated. Nobody fell out of love with anyone, and he can't believe that he'll be able to be with somebody else without feeling disloyal or unfaithful to me. So I do try to reassure him that it would bring me comfort. It would bring me joy to know that he will be able to continue and live his life. I can't imagine the loneliness that he would feel without moving on and finding somebody else, but it's very hard for him to imagine that.
It must be the most difficult conversation to have, and one, I mean, I have to say my husband and I did talk about what would happen if one of us died, and we both kind of said, you know, well, you know, I'd like you to move on and find that, but we weren't having that conversation amongst the knowledge of knowing it was going to become a reality. You know, it was just a conversation that you have at times just randomly. But you know, and obviously he died suddenly, so we didn't get to have all these conversations. But you know, to have that conversation when you know it's going to become a reality at some point, that's very different, isn't it? It's a very different, and you're both coming at it from very different angles. You want to know that he's going to be okay. He can't imagine life without you in it, and probably doesn't want to have the conversation. So you're both coming from very different angles, and do you ever clash on it? Are there things sometimes that you want to talk about that he doesn't, and it causes a frustration, a disconnect?
Not with that, I don't think. I think he probably deep down appreciates what I'm trying to do when I'm encouraging him. And for example, I'm often saying to him, I'm encouraging him to do stuff on his own, because I don't have the energy to do everything, you see, so anymore. But I don't want him to miss out on fun opportunities, and plus, you know, he's creating memories that don't involve me, which I think is really good for him. So, but he finds that very difficult. That makes him feel guilty then that he's carrying on normal life without me. But it is about communication, and definitely the key. But we don't clash on that really at all.
That's that, because it must be difficult. It must be so difficult to have these conversations. But
Yeah.
I know when we spoke before, we talked about, I'd obviously done David Kessler's Grief Educators program, and he did talk in that about, the more meaningful the death, the more meaningful the grief. And from talking to you, I get a real sense that you are working towards making your death as meaningful as possible, to support your loved ones around you, so that they can find I guess a more meaningful way through their grief, which is very brave and very courageous. It really is, and such a wonderful thing to do for your loved ones, but must be so incredibly hard to do as well.
I find myself trying to protect people a lot as well. There are things that maybe I feel that I want to talk about more at length, but about how I'm feeling, but I tend not to. It's the only, when we think about, do we clash? The one thing I think that perhaps we do clash with occasionally is that if I talk to Simon about how I'm feeling, and he'll try, and he loves me, so he wants to make things right. So he'll say, well, what about this, or this? And I'll say, yeah, but I can't, or I put this and put that in reply. And so he feels like he can't really do any right. And I try not to disempower him, but it's very difficult, because then if I don't take his advice, he's trying to fix things. It just makes him feel like, he can't do anything right. He can't say anything right. He can't, powerless kind of thing. And so sometimes, he'll, oh, well, be not stroppy as such, but we just don't speak about it then. The communication's cut off, and that's it.
Do you know what? There's a real connection, isn't there, between a lot of what you're saying. I can so resonate with, in terms of being a griever of a person that's lost a loved one, like all the secondary losses, that feeling of being a burden and not wanting to put pain on people, wanting to really explain how you're feeling to people, but you don't feel like you can. Also that feeling of wanting to talk to someone, but them trying to fix you and find solutions. Of course they do, because they want to help you, they want to make it better, but sometimes you just want someone to listen and to hold you and kind of say, I'm here. But that's so hard to do when you love someone so dearly, isn't it? You kind of just want it all to go away. You want to feel like you've got something to offer that's going to help the situation. And it's just, you can really see, I know that, when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did her extensive research on grief and loss, and her 5 stages were developed, weren't they, with the terminally ill, and later on went on to discover, actually there's a lot of that is similar to those that are grieving the loss of a loved one. And talking to you, I can really feel that. Obviously coming from very different angles, but that loss, that grief, it has so many similarities, doesn't it? And it pulls in all those different directions, and you feel all those things, but for different reasons, different experiences.
I find myself going through quite long periods of depression, feeling hopeless. What's the point? And then I describe it. These are the things that I find difficult to talk about with Simon, really, or any of my loved ones, my friends, because it's just something so personal. But it's an existential crisis. Is that, what's the meaning in life? What's the point? And I can't. There's so much loss that's happened that I just find it very difficult to move forward. I find nature very healing in that respect, and I know you'll relate to that because you're much the same as me.
Very, very much so.
Nature Nature, there's a sense of permanence about nature, isn't there? Life goes on. You know, you think about the leaves of the trees come off in the autumn, and then we've got the beauty, and there's beauty in that, beauty in winter. Then you've got the spring and the summer, and there's new life. There's a cycle of death and rebirth all the time with nature. And that's what's comforting to me, is that I know that life will go on. I know life will always be there. The seasons will come and go, and each season that comes, I always think, oh, I hope I see next spring, you know, but at one point I won't, you know. But nature does help me a lot, and I do follow a nature-based spiritual path anyway, so it features very importantly in our lives. But yeah, I do, and I also get very low when I imagine what it's going to be like for Simon, coming home after work to an empty house and eating alone, and you know, I sit there and I imagine what that's going to be like for him, and I probably overthink things and trying to think ahead too much in some ways. And yeah, I feel quite broken as well when I think about what that's going to be like for my son, because he still needs me at the moment because of his own mental health issues. He's not fully independent, and I just really pray that he will be more settled before I die. Losing your mum at such a young age is going to be very difficult for him. And I just feel so upset, and it makes me feel very low about my mum as well. I mean, she's older and she doesn't need this. My head's so full of grief, my own grief, and the anticipated grief and bereavement for my loved ones. So it's just really hard. And then one of the other things, and you probably know that when people are dying, there are certain things they want to put in place, and one of them is making amends with people. And I saw that a lot with patients, really. They wanted to release that regret and that sorrow, and they wanted to forgive and wanted others to forgive them, and so on. It's sort of making things right. And I'm finding that really difficult, because I tried to build a bridge with someone who is very important in my life, and she's completely blanked me on it. She stopped me from being able to put things right, even though she knows how ill I am, and I've had a lot of counselling over that, Karen. I do really, if I think too much about it, I do struggle, but I've had to accept on reflection and with the counselling that this is really a reflection of her own headspace and not mine. It's something that there's nothing I can do about it, but her motives must serve her in whatever way that might be. I wish that we could mend the rift, but I think I've had to accept that that's not going to happen. Which is very difficult. And I remember that happening with patients at times, and how devastated they were, because when you're dying, there's a last chance to put things right, and when somebody disallows that, then that's really very, very hurtful. And it's complicated, I know, but I do find that difficult. I feel quite angry at times and resentful, and although much of that's past, I've pretty much accepted and come to terms with things, really. But a lot of the anger is about the fact that I can't do things that I want to do. Living with that uncertainty means that we can't make plans, and we have to live from one month to the next, knowing that we can't plan too far ahead with holidays. There's nothing certain. I know life's not certain, really, but cancer just really takes over. And I've got that acceptance now of this situation to a certain degree as well, like I've said before. I'm just grateful that I've got to this age, see my son grow up to the age that he is, and that I've experienced so much. But it's because of that acceptance that it's enabled me, empowered me to be able to put plans into place. Planning ahead is really important. They're difficult conversations that I think that everybody should have, that are impossible at times, but so important. And I think perhaps do help after somebody's lost a loved one in their bereavement. I've had so many of these conversations with patients before, so it's not easy for my loved ones. An example is that I told you this when we spoke before, but I requested a do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation, so DNAR, when my disease first spread to my chest. And although I talked it through with Simon and my loved ones regarding what that means, they were horrified. I mean, what it really means is that if my heart stops, if I collapse, it just means that they won't restart my heart or breathing. They will allow a natural death. It's not that paramedics or doctors won't do anything. They will do everything they possibly can to provide comfort and allow a dignified and graceful death. The only difference is that they just allow death to happen naturally. They just don't use all the equipment and all the stuff restarting the heart. But Simon found that very difficult. He said, I don't think that I can do that. If you collapsed, he said, I think I'd have to do something, because he's trained in first aid. So I've had to accept that, yes, okay, that's something he would have to do. I probably would know very little about it. But yeah, hopefully that scenario won't come into play. But that was a very difficult situation, I think, a conversation for us to have. I've written down about my funeral and what I'd like. What I'd really like is a huge Viking funeral with a funeral pyre, but they don't allow that, Karen, do they? So I've had to opt for a simple nature-based funeral.
Yeah.
And I've got the money to pay for it, so it's not a financial burden on my loved ones. And because funerals are so expensive these days, aren't they?
So expensive. Yes.
Yeah. Written down what I want, music-wise, and who I'd like to have the funeral right, but to perform the funeral rites. But everything's, I think, it's fluid. I think that if Simon wanted something else, I wouldn't be upset about that. I've already started gifting possessions to people as well. Things that I want people to have, especially, I'm giving those, and I'm making a list of things that I want people to have, so it makes it easier for Simon. Yeah, so anticipatory grief is hard, but it's also equally wonderful in providing an opportunity to do all the things and say the things that you want.
Yeah, that it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I think, for want of a better expression, because you know, you're able to make those plans and you know, voice the choices and decisions and have those conversations, I suppose. And you know, I am sorry about your friend and wanting to reach out and make peace. That must be incredibly hurtful and frustrating. And like you say, it's, you know, we have to understand in life, don't we, that we can't control other people and their choices and their reactions, but sometimes it can definitely feel very personal, and we can't make sense of things sometimes. No. And it's living with things like that, isn't it? And knowing that you're not going to get an opportunity further down the line to you know, make that amends, because we always like to think we've got time and in the future and all that stuff that we tell ourselves, but when you're faced with the reality that that's not, you know, a long-term plan for you, that's really difficult. And you know, like having those conversations, they are I totally agree with you, you know, like talking to people about your death, your wishes, what you want after you've gone. I think that I believe that they are truly important conversations for us all to have, whether we're facing that imminently or not, because exactly to your point, who knows when our time is going to come, you know, we don't know. And I think it really does help those left behind to understand a little bit more about what your wishes would be. And you know, in terms of the, you know, attempting resuscitation, I understand that. And I think, you know, working in the medical world, you know that CPR is rarely successful.
It'd be futile in my situation. By then, when that happens, it would just be wrong.
Yeah. But that's so hard when you're the one left behind, because you don't, you know, death is so final, and I do you know, I find it so strange, because it's a natural part of life, isn't it? It's we live and we die, and exactly to your point, you know, we go out, we look around the world, we look in nature, we look at all things that live, they die, you know. And every year we go through the cycle of the seasons, and things die and then they come to life again, and that is so representative of life, isn't it? But yet it's so hard for us to comprehend. And I don't understand why our human brains, I mean, I do understand, because it's love. And when you love someone and they die, it's incredibly painful. But then there's that side of me that goes, why are we not designed better to deal with it? Because it's inevitable. It's the only thing in life that we can be certain of.
We prepare for birth, don't we?
Yes.
With birthing plans. Why not prepare for something else that's very certain? You know, death is very much a part of life, I feel.
It is.
It's, you know, we can't live forever. Obviously, it's very sad when I'm 58 now, and so I feel very lucky to have reached the age that I have, but I know plenty of younger women, which is very different, I feel. But at my age, I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of talking about death, because that's something that I've seen plenty of people die or be close to death. And so I've got no fear of dying. And I think that's helped me a lot. Obviously, the complications of the cancer are not so nice, and I wish I didn't know about those. But the body itself knows how to die naturally. And so we just have to trust in the process. And, it's the leaving people behind that gets me. To never be able to hear the voices that you love again is very painful. So I just don't take it for granted, you know, the voice, the gentle voice of Simon when he tells me that he loves me. And when I'm on the phone to Sam, my son, at night, and he'll say, "Oh, no night then, Mum, love you." I can't imagine not hearing those voices again. And, you know, the grandchildren saying, "Shall we go and feed the badgers, Nana?" That gets me. I talk so openly about everything, but I get that pain in my throat, and I don't think I'm never able to say about how I feel about leaving everybody behind without getting upset. Death itself isn't scary to me, but leaving everybody behind is, and that's the price that you pay for love, isn't it? Although I think humans are a bundle of energy. We energetically, everything that is living has energy. Electrical impulse is energy. And so I believe that this bundle of energy goes back into the universe, and so the essence of me will live on. I still believe that I'll still be around. My body will go back to the earth, the nature, and that actually is a comfort to me, because nature is so beautiful. That's what I'm not. That doesn't faze me. And I believe that, obviously, you know, energetically, the essence of us is still going to be around. but definitely it's the leaving people behind. And I expect that a lot of your listeners will relate to that, how painful those conversations are, because of ultimately what's going to happen is that that person's going to leave you, they're going to die.
Yeah, and like you say, it's death is very natural. And you know, I remember doing a exercise with David Kessler, and where we had to visualize death itself and what we'd say to it. And I've always very much feared death, but actually through doing this exercise that I did with David Kessler, I actually realized it wasn't death itself that I was scared of. Like you say, it's the leaving behind of the people that you love. And you know, I'm not in a position where I'm facing that knowingly, but it was that real overwhelming feeling when I did this exercise of, do you know what, death actually, we're all going to do it. I'm not scared of that itself. I feel like actually that my belief is that death is quite a peaceful experience, and it might not be what we observe. You know, when somebody dies, death, and you know, being a nurse myself historically, and seeing people die, what we sometimes see can look quite traumatic, can't it? And it can look, and it sounds not how you expect it to sound. It doesn't look how you expect it to look, like it's sometimes portrayed in TV and stuff. But you know, yes, it can be traumatic, absolutely. I'm not saying it isn't ever, but sometimes I think what's experienced by the person dying isn't necessarily what we observe watching that person die. And it can feel like it's quite traumatic, but I feel sometimes for the person themselves dying, like you say, the body knows how to do it. And
I know we've spoken about some of this previously. I mean, when somebody is dying, and you can often hear what we know as the death rattle, all the secretions in the back of the throat, and it sounds awful when you're keeping a bedside vigil, and that goes on for hours and hours and days for some people. And so medically we can dry those secretions up so it's less traumatic for the family, but for the patient themselves, they're not aware. The reason why that's not distressing to the patient is because they are so deeply unconscious by that time that they're not even feeling anything in their throat. If you get something in your throat, you're clearing your throat, aren't you? The minute, and you're sort of coughing and spluttering. But you can see when somebody has all that collection of secretions in the back of their throat, if they're not clearing them, it's not bothering them. So take comfort from that. It sounds worse than it actually is.
And I think sometimes our perception of what death is going to look like and the reality of it can be traumatic for people. It is traumatic, but you know, to go back to your point, I think that saying goodbye to those that you love and how they're going to be after you've gone is horrible. You know, especially as a parent, with children, and like you say, with grandchildren, it's that feeling. And there's a, you know, that part of you that kind of goes, well, I want them to go on and be okay, but the reality is, you know, that it is going to be hard, because like you say, it's the price you pay for love, and we have to go through that grieving process. It's natural and it's necessary, isn't it, to our human lived experience. But when you think about, you know, when your time comes, and you know, your husband, your son, and your mum, when you think of them after you, do you kind of think about how best they can honor you, and you know what you wanted to teach? Because I very much talk to my clients about honoring your person, honoring your own life, being the best parts of your person, taking forward the lessons, the values, the beliefs of your person, you know, to feel like what they taught you can be taken forward with you, to keep them alive, like you know, to kind of honor that life and that love. And for you, what lessons, what values, what beliefs, what way would you love your people to honor you when your time comes?
Oh, I definitely think keep life simple. If things become stressful in life because of work or any other situation, try if you can to leave that behind and live life very simply, and to find joy in the simple things, because actually that's what matters. It's not grand gestures. It's not about visiting far-flung countries. It's about noticing what's on your doorstep. It's about seeing rainbows. It's about looking at the sky at night and seeing the moon, how amazing it looks, and the stars, finding joy in the simple things in life, the seasons, and to know that it will get better. The grief will get better, and to find something in life to be grateful for each day. Don't dwell on all the negative stuff. Try to think of something. There's always negative stuff, but try to find something that you can be grateful for. And yeah, be kind. One of the biggest things, I think, is that serving others and being kind to others and doing other things for other people is very healing for yourself. And so I'd like them to carry on the work that I've been doing, raising awareness with ovarian cancer. And about, I'm quite the activist. I've always been the same, mainly about protecting animals. And because I was part of the badger group for a long, long time. And I've worked in wildlife rescue as well. So whatever it might be, but finding some joy in giving to others is very important, and protecting those that are vulnerable.
Do you know what? I feel like everything that you say there is something that I've learned in my grief, for sure. And you know, before Simon died, I probably was quite hung up on the big things and visiting the far-flung countries and you know, all these, I don't know, external things, I suppose, that we believe brings us joy. But actually, I think a lot of what my grief has taught me is really finding peace, joy in the now, in nature, in the things around us, in simplicity, you know. And
Absolutely.
you know, just seeing the birds, watching, you know, things come alive at spring, sitting somewhere with a lovely cup of coffee, being by water, slowing down, breathing, looking for the good in the world, you know, really. And when I talk about joy, a lot of people, you can almost see them like, joy, I'm grieving. And we see joy as this really heightened state of happiness, like dancing on tables and living our best life. For me, joy is just really finding that contentment, that peace, that love, that harmony with the world, where you can look around, see the good in nature, in the sky. Just, it really is so nurturing, isn't it? So nurturing. And
you can be sat outside, can't you, you know, having a cup of tea and feeling very, very sorrowful and grief stricken, tears running down your face for whatever reason. But then, you know, suddenly you can notice a robin just hop onto the grass beside you. And that moment just brings you out of that grief just momentarily. And those sorts of things that are what matters. And yes, okay, you might then go back to feeling upset and grief stricken, but for that moment in time, you forgot about that. You saw the joy, and those small moments of joy will grow in length over time. And to have that trust that it will do.
And I think, you know, it's hard, isn't it, at the beginning, you know, when you're in that grief, that raw grief, to feel that. And it must certainly be the same for you. But I think you do have such a huge heart and a wonderful outlook. And I think your ability to see the good and to find gratitude gives you that hope, that courage, that ability to face what you're going through, and to know that the people that you love around you, yes, they're going to be hurting, yes, it's going to be painful, but you know that they will be okay in time. And that love that they have for you will give them so much, having shared their lives with you, and who you are as a person has enriched them and shaped them, and that truly is a wonderful gift. But like you say, the pain is still inevitable, sadly.
I'm finding your podcast really helpful to listen to, because it's reassuring. It's giving me hope for Simon and my loved ones. I know I've been through grief myself, but I haven't lost my husband. My husband hasn't died. This is new territory for me. And in all my experience over the years in nursing, my experience of bereavement is very much from a personal point of view, because we do a one-off bereavement visit, but we wouldn't see people months or years afterwards. I've not experienced that, from a spouse point of view. I've had other close bereavements, and I know how I've coped, and I've been devastated, and it took me a long time to get over it. But your podcast, what it's doing is listening to other widows or widowers talking about losing their person. It's just helping me to be able to help Simon. So I should get him to listen to your podcast. I think it might be a bit too painful for him.
Maybe afterwards. But I think for him, you're, again, it's coming from the different angles. You're wanting to know how he's going to be afterwards, to give you that reassurance, that hope, I guess, and that knowing. But for him, he's probably not, he's not there yet, is he? He just wants to be here with you, understandably, and it's about enjoying that time together as much as you can, isn't it? And being realistic and opening, having the conversations about what's coming, but also still, what like you say, you are still here, you are still alive, and you are still able to enjoy each other in the best way that you can. And it's trying not to let, and I say this to clients, not let the death overshadow the life. And I guess it works in your situation as well, doesn't it, of kind of, we've got to face it, and at some point it become a reality, but let's try and live whilst we're still able to live. But Diane, your story is incredible, and I genuinely, I'm so sorry that we have to have this conversation. You're going through what you're going through, but I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing. That the support and the strength and the wisdom that you share with others, I can't even begin to imagine what you're offering people, because I know what it means to be around others that are going through something similar to you, and you're creating that space for people facing what you're facing, and to be able to share that together. We are stronger together, aren't we?
Definitely.
We all are. And I think to find, your tribe, for people don't always like that expression, but people that, get it. It's that sign. As much as you and I can have this conversation, I'm not living your experience, and I can't fully understand it, but to be around people that do.
Thank you so much, though, for your kind words. And I found my tribe as well, in the ovarian cancer community. We're a strong bunch, and we pick each other up. But
that's it.
I'm just very grateful to you for the opportunity to be able to speak so openly about something that's so important.
It is. And thank you for doing it, Diane. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and
thank you.
I just appreciate your time and your energy. I really do. So thank you.